Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Renuka and with me is Aditi Lumba, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. President Ramnath Kovind says recent inflow of investment of $48 billion is testimony to global investors' belief in India's growth story. Economic survey pegs India's GDP growth at 8 to 8.5% in 2022-23. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman to present Union Budget 2022-23 in Parliament on Tuesday. US Congressman urges President Biden to reject Pakistan Ambassador Masood Khan's appointment. India and Russia hold bilateral consultations on United Nations ahead of Russia's presidency of the UN Security Council. Isaac Herzog becomes the first Israeli president to visit the UAE in a historic step towards normalizing relations. Sacred ensembles of the Hoysala finalized as India's nomination for consideration as UNESCO World Heritage Site. In football, Cameroon to face Egypt and Burkina Faso to clash with Senegal for a place in the Africa Cup of Nations final. As the number of COVID-19 cases are rising fast in several parts of the country, we appeal to our listeners to be vigilant and get fully vaccinated and help others, including children between 15 and 18 years, to get vaccinated. As the new Omicron variant of coronavirus is causing concern, please continue to follow the 3 simple steps to stay safe. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, and focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact the national helpline numbers 011 2397 8046 and 1075. And now the news in detail. President Ramnath Kovind has said that the government is moving fast on building a strong foundation for the next 25 years, following the mantra of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas or Sabka Prayas, which connotes a spirit of collective effort for collective progress and prosperity. He said the most important resolution related to this foundation is the creation of inclusive and self-reliant India.
आजादी का अमृत महोत्सव हम सभी भारतीयों के लिए अगले 25 वर्षों के संकल्पों को आकार देने का पवित्र अवसर है। मेरी सरकार सबका साथ, सबका विकास, सबका विश्वास और सबका प्रयास के मंत्र पर चलते हुए अगले 25 वर्षों के लिए मजबूत बुनियाद पर तेजी से काम कर रही है। इस बुनियाद का सबसे महत्वपूर्ण संकल्प एक सर्वसमावेशी, सर्वहितकारी, सशक्त भारत का निर्माण और देश की आत्मनिर्भरता है।
Addressing the joint sitting of both the Houses of Parliament on Monday, the President said that India has once again become one of the fastest growing economies of the world due to relentless efforts of the government. Mr. Kovind said that the inflow of $48 billion in investment in the first 7 months of the current financial year was a testimony to the belief the global investor community has in India's growth story.
देश में जीएसटी कलेक्शन पिछले कई महीनों से निरंतर 1 लाख करोड़ रुपए से ऊपर बना हुआ है। इस वित्त वर्ष के पहले 7 महीनों में $48 बिलियन का विदेशी निवेश आना इस बात का प्रमाण है कि अंतर्राष्ट्रीय निवेशक भारत के विकास को लेकर बहुत आश्वस्त हैं।
Addressing the joint sitting of both the houses of Parliament on Monday, the President said that India has once again become one of the fastest growing economies of the world due to relentless efforts of the government. Mr. Kovind said that the inflow of $48 billion in investment in first 7 months of the current financial year was the testimony to belief the global investor community has in India's growth story. Mr. Kovind said the government has lauded 14 key production-linked incentive schemes. He added these PLI schemes will not only help transform India as a global manufacturing hub, but also create over 60 lakh jobs. He said the government has integrated different ministries to work in a synergized manner under the Pradhan Mantri Gati Shakti National Master Plan to accelerate infrastructure development. Talking about India's efforts during the COVID-19 pandemic, the President said the vaccination program has provided India's capabilities in the fight against it. Highlighting the various initiatives of the government, the President said, Pradhan Mantri Ayushman Bharat Health Infrastructure Mission will not only help in meeting the President's health needs, but also prepare the country for any crisis situation in future. Reiterating the government's mantra of Antyodaya, he said the government is giving free ration every month to all the poor under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. The government has said that India's GDP is projected to grow in real terms by 8 to 8.5% in 2020-23, and the country will still be the world's fastest economy. Addressing media in New Delhi on the Economic Survey 2021-22, Chief Economic Advisor Dr. V. Anantha Nageshwaran said,
There's been a revival of economic activity to pre-pandemic levels in the year 21-22. This shows through in the national accounts, and it shows through in a whole bunch of high-frequency data that we have. I've just, for illustration, put the e-way bill collection, and you can see that there was a big contraction during the national lockdown last year, then a sharp revival, a more shallow slowdown during the second wave. So even though there was the health cost of the second wave was much more severe, the economic cost of it by almost all accounts was much milder. But there was an impact and then a subsequent revival.
During the presentation on the highlight of the Economic Survey, Principal Economic Advisor in the Finance Ministry Sanjeev Sanyal said that there has been a revival in economic activities to pre-pandemic levels in the year 2021-22. He said the economic cost of the second wave of COVID-19 pandemic was much milder in comparison to the first wave.
In an exclusive interview to AIR News, Dr. Vivek Debroy, Chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, said that the 9.2% GDP growth projection for 2021-22 given in the Economic Survey is completely realistic and the revival is robust across sectors.
People outside the government have also remarked on the fact that there is a revival going on. It's a fairly robust revival across sectors, and this does not merely offset the decline that happened in the preceding year. The level of GDP also surpasses the pre-pandemic levels. This is a point that survey has also made. If you look at external forecasts, most people today would go along with that 9.2% real growth rate projected in survey for this financial year. So therefore, I think that 9.2% is completely realistic. Whether it's going to be 9% or 9.5%, we will know only at the end of the year, but 9.2% is completely realistic.
Meanwhile, speaking exclusively to All India Radio News, Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog, Dr. Rajiv Kumar said, the GDP growth rate is poised to be higher than the pre-pandemic levels. Dr. Kumar stressed on the solid foundation for this forecast.
My own understanding would be that Indian economy in 2022-23 will grow between 8.5% to 9%. I go along with the economic survey. The survey's assumptions on which this growth target, the growth estimate is based are very sound. They're talking about the recovery in manufacturing, in the services, which had suffered the most, and also in private investment and consumption. And of course, the government will do its role in expanding the capital expenditure on public infrastructure. So I think altogether, we are now on a trajectory of rapid and sustained growth in the years to come.
Earlier, in its latest World Economic Outlook, the IMF had projected India's growth rate at 9% in the financial year 2022-23. It noted that India's prospects for 2023 are marked up on expected improvements to credit growth and subsequently investment and consumption. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman will present the Union Budget for the financial year 2022-23 in Lok Sabha on Tuesday at 11 a.m. The copy of the budget will be laid on the table of Rajya Sabha soon thereafter. A meeting of the Union Cabinet will be held tomorrow to approve the Union Budget 2022-23. After getting the nod from the Cabinet, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman will present the Union Budget 2022-23 in a paperless form for the second time on Tuesday in Lok Sabha. Earlier, the Union Budget of 2021-22 was delivered in paperless form last year for the first time.
Member of U.S. Congress, Mr. Scott Perry, has written to U.S. President Joe Biden expressing grave concern over the appointment of Masood Khan as Pakistan's ambassador to the U.S. The U.S. government has reportedly placed a pause on the appointment in light of growing concerns over the ambassador's terror links. In a letter dated the 27th of January, the congressman has strongly criticized Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan's nomination of the bona fide terrorist sympathizer who is working to undermine the interests of both the US and its Indian allies in the region. The letter adds that Masood Khan has praised both terrorists and foreign organizations, including the Hizbul Mujahideen, in stark and unsettling terms. The letter adds that he had willingly appeared in public alongside Fazlur Rahman Khalil, a specially designated global terrorist who is the founder of Harkatul Mujahideen, a US-designated foreign terrorist organization. The letter also underlines that Masood Khan is also a supporter of the Lashkar-e-Taiba, the terrorist group behind the dastardly attacks in Mumbai in 2008. The letter notes calls upon President Biden to reject any efforts by the government of Pakistan to install the jihadist as Pakistan's ambassador to the US. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has congratulated Prime Minister of Portugal, Antonio Costa, on winning the parliamentary elections in the country. In a tweet, Mr. Modi said Mr. Costa's victory as a resounding performance. He said he looks forward to continuing deepening the warm and time-tested relationship with Portugal.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, in a statement issued by his spokesperson, described the situation in Myanmar as an intensification of violence, human rights violations, rising poverty and indifference to worsening humanitarian conditions by the military regime. In a statement ahead of the 1st February anniversary, marking a year since the military takeover of the country, Mr. Guterres said that the humanitarian access to people in need is critically important for the United Nations and partners to continue to deliver on the ground. Israel President Isaac Herzog and First Lady Michael Herzog opened Israel's National Day at the Dubai Expo 2020. In what is the first visit by an Israeli president in the United Arab Emirates, Mr. Herzog expressed delight and said he is deeply moved by the warm welcome in Abu Dhabi. Mr. Herzog expressed pleasure at the Israel national anthem being played in the United Arab Emirates. He added that it is a reminder of what can be accomplished with collaboration to break down borders and work for a better future together. The UAE became the first Gulf nation to normalize relations with Israel under the Abraham Accords in 2020. The visit assumes significance in light of the recent visit to the UAE by Israel Prime Minister Naftali Bennett.
The United Nations has said that more than 100 former members of the Afghan government, its security forces and those who worked with international troops have been killed since the Taliban took over the country. In a report, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that more than two-thirds of the victims were allegedly killed extrajudicially by the Taliban or its affiliates. The UN mission also documented 44 cases of temporary arrests, beatings and threats of intimidation, 42 of them by the Taliban. Mr. Guterres said human rights defenders and media workers also continue to come under attack, intimidation, harassment and killings. The Taliban initially promised a general amnesty for those linked to the former government and international forces and tolerance and inclusiveness towards women and ethnic minorities. However, the Taliban have renewed restrictions on women and appointed an all-male government, which have met with dismay by the international community. U.S. President Joe Biden has called upon the Taliban to immediately release captured U.S. Navy veteran Mark Freshis. In its stern statement, Mr. Biden said that 2 years ago, Mr. Freretz, a civil engineer, was taken hostage in Afghanistan and has been under Taliban captivity since. The statement added that threatening the safety of Americans or any innocent civilians is always unacceptable and hostage-taking is an act of particular cruelty and cowardice.
India and Russia held bilateral consultations on United Nations-related issues in New Delhi on Monday. The Indian delegation congratulated Russia on its upcoming presidency of the UN Security Council in the month of February. Both sides held wide-ranging discussions on issues on the UN Security Council agenda and related developments. Both sides agreed to deepen cooperation on issues of mutual interest in multilateral platforms. The Russian delegation briefed India on its priorities during the 76th session of the UN General Assembly. Both sides also agreed to work closely together given the common challenges faced and in keeping with their long-standing special and privileged strategic partnership. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a special program on the economic survey and what it has to say about prospects for future. The narration is by Sonu Sood, AIR correspondent.
The Union Minister for Finance and Corporate Affairs, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman, presented the Economic Survey 2021-22 in Parliament today. Economic Survey gives an overview of the economy's performance on various parameters during the current financial year and outlook for the coming year. In the Economic Survey, Indian economy is estimated to grow by 9.2% in 2021-22 as per first advanced estimates, subsequent to a contraction of 7.3% in 2020-21. GDP is projected to grow by 8 to 8.5% in real terms in 2022-23. The year ahead is poised for a pickup in private sector investment, with the financial system in good position to provide support for economy's revival. As per IMF's latest World Economic Outlook projections, India's real GDP projected to grow at 9% in 2021-22 and at 9% in 2022-23 also, and 7.1% in 2023-24, which would make India the fastest growing major economy in the world for all 3 years. Agriculture and allied sectors are expected to grow by 3.9%, industry by 11.8%, and services sector by 8.2% in 2021-22. On demand side, consumption is estimated to grow by 7%, gross fixed capital formation by 15%, exports by 16.5%, and imports by 29.4% in 2021-22. Macroeconomic stability indicators suggest that the Indian economy is well placed to take on the challenges of 2022-23. Combination of high foreign exchange reserves, sustained foreign direct investment, and rising export earnings will provide adequate buffer against possible global liquidity tapering in 2022-23. Economic impact of second wave was much smaller than that during the full lockdown phase in 2020-21, though health impact was more severe. Government's flexible and multi-layered response is partly based on an agile framework that uses feedback loops and the use of 80 high-frequency indicators in an environment of extreme uncertainty. Talking of fiscal situation, the revenue receipts from the central government April to November 2021 have gone up by 67.2% year-on-year as against an expected growth of 9.6% in the 2021-22 budget estimates. Gross tax revenue registers a growth of over 50% during April to November 2021 in year-on-year terms. This performance is strong compared to pre-pandemic levels of 2029-20 also. During April to November 2021, CAPEX has grown by 13.5% year-on-year with focus on infrastructure-intensive sectors. Sustained revenue collection and a targeted expenditure policy has contained the fiscal deficit for April to November 2021 at 46.2% of budgeted expenditure. India's merchandise exports and imports rebounded strongly and surpassed pre-COVID levels during the current financial year. Foreign exchange reserves crossed $600 billion in the first half of 2021-22 and touched $633.6 billion as of December 31, 2021. As of end November 2021, India was the fourth largest forex reserves holder in the world after China, Japan, and Switzerland. Talking of monetary management and financial intermediation, the liquidity in the system remained in surplus. Repo rate was maintained by the RBI at 4% in 2021-22. RBI undertook various measures such as G-Sec acquisition program and special long-term repo operations to provide further liquidity. Year-on-year bank credit growth accelerated gradually in 2021-22 from 5.3% in April 2021 to 9.2% as on 31st December 2021. It was an exceptional year for the capital markets too. Rupees 89,066 crore was raised via 75 initial public offering IPO issues in April to November 2021, which is much higher than in any year in the last decade. Sensex and Nifty scaled up to touch peak at 61,766 and 18,477 on October 18, 2021. Among major emerging market economies, Indian markets outperformed peers in April to December 2021. Talking of inflation, the average headline CPI combined inflation moderated to 5.2% in 2021-22 April to December from 6.6% in the corresponding period of 2020-21. Effective supply-side management kept prices of most essential commodities under control during the year. Proactive measures were taken to contain the price rise in pulses and edible oils. Reduction in central excise and subsequent cuts in value-added tax by most states helped ease petrol and diesel prices. Talking of sustainable development and climate change, apart from continuous efforts for sustainable development and climate change, at the COP26 in Glasgow in November 2021, the Prime Minister announced ambitious targets to be achieved by 2030 to enable further reduction in emissions. The need to start the one-word movement, lifestyle for environment, urging mindful and deliberate utilization instead of mindless and destructive consumption was underlined. The agriculture sector experienced buoyant growth in the past 2 years, registering a growth of 3.6% in 2020-21 and 3.9% in 2021-22. Minimum support price policy is being used to promote crop diversification. Allied sectors, including animal husbandry, dairying, and fisheries, are steadily emerging to be high-growth sectors and major drivers of overall growth in agriculture sector. Government facilitates food processing through various measures of infrastructure development, subsidized transportation, and support for formalization of micro-food enterprises. Capital expenditure for the Indian Railways has increased 5 times in comparison to the 2014 level. Extent of road construction per day increased substantially in 2020-21 to 36.5 kilometers per day from 28 kilometers per day in 2019-20, a rise of 30.4%. Net profit to sales ratio of large corporates reached an all-time high of 10.6% in July to September quarter of 2021-22, despite the pandemic. Introduction of production-linked incentive schemes, major boost provided to infrastructure, both physical as well as digital, along with measures to reduce transaction costs and improve ease of doing business, which would support the pace of recovery. Talking of services sector, gross value added of services crossed pre-pandemic level in July to September quarter of 2021-22. However, GVA of contact-intensive sectors like trade, transport, etc. still remain below pre-pandemic level. Overall, service sector GVA is expected to grow by 8.2% in 2021-22. During the first half of 2021-22, service sector received over $16.7 billion FDI, accounting for almost 54% of total FDI inflows into India. India has become the third largest startup ecosystem in the world after US and China. Number of new recognized startups increased to over 14,000 in 2021-22 from 733 in 2016-17. 44 Indian startups have achieved unicorn status in 2021, taking overall tally of unicorns to 83, most of which are in services sector. 157.94 crore doses of COVID-19 vaccines were administered as on 16th January 2022. 91.39 crore first doses and 66.05 crore second doses. With revival of economy, employment indicators bounced back to pre-pandemic levels during last quarter of 2020-21. As per the quarterly periodic labor force survey data up to March 2021, employment in urban sector affected by the pandemic has recovered almost to the pre-pandemic level. According to Employees Provident Fund Organization data, formalization of jobs continued during second COVID wave. Adverse impact of COVID on formalization of jobs was much lower than during the first COVID wave. Expenditure on social services, health, education and others by centre and states as a proportion of GDP increased from 6.2% in 2014-15 to 8.6% in 2021-22.
This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on our Twitter handle at AIR News Alert.
The Hoysala temples of Beluru, Halebeedu and Somnathpura in the southern Indian state of Karnataka have been finalized as India's nomination for consideration as World Heritage for the year 2022-23. Minister of Culture, Tourism and Development of Northeastern Region, G. Kishan Reddy, hailed the development as a great moment for India. A statement from the Culture Ministry said that the sacred ensembles of the Hoysala have been on UNESCO's tentative list since the 15th of April 2014 and represent one of the highest points of human creative genius and stand testimony to the rich historical and cultural heritage of India.
In football, at the Africa Cup of Nations, Senegal beat Equatorial Guinea 3-1 to seal a spot in the semi-finals. Senegal will face Burkina Faso in the semi-finals on Thursday. In the other quarter-final encounter on Sunday, Egypt, led by an inspired Mohamed Salah, beat Morocco 2-1 to enter the last four. Egypt are set to lock horns with Cameroon on Friday for a place in the title clash.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. Firstly, let's see what made the headlines in Afghanistan. Gandhara reports that one priest from a Christian church in northwest Pakistan has been killed and another injured after their car was ambushed by unknown militants in the capital of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province on Sunday. Toro News reports that Afghans seeking visas for Pakistan complained that they have been struggling with the process and facing delays. Let's take a look at what made the headlines in Nepal. Khabar Hub reports that China's reluctance to supply materials hampering constructions of hotels in Nepal. The Rising Nepal Daily reports that 3,049 new cases of COVID-19 have been confirmed on Sunday. And now in news from Bangladesh. Daily Star reports that the Cox's Bazar District and Session Judge sentenced to death suspended Police Inspector Pradeep Kumar Das for the killing of retired Major Sinha Mohammad Rashid Khan. The U.S. has donated 10 million doses of the Pfizer COVID vaccines to Bangladesh, reports Daily Sun. In some news from China, most media houses carried the news of Chinese Lunar New Year, which falls on 1st of February, the Tuesday. It will be a holiday week which will start with a family reunion and feast from Monday, with the eve of the Lunar New Year. PTI writes that cash-strapped Pakistan is looking to secure a $3 billion loan from China. A quick look at the headlines once again. President Ramnath Kovind says recent inflow of investment of $48 billion is testimony to global investors' belief in India's growth story. Economic survey pegs India's GDP growth at 8 to 8.5% in 2022-23. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman to present Union Budget 2022-23 in Parliament on Tuesday. U.S. Congressman urges President Biden to reject Pakistan Ambassador Masood Khan's appointment. India and Russia hold bilateral consultations on United Nations ahead of Russia's presidency of the UN Security Council. Isaac Herzog becomes the first Israeli president to visit the UAE in a historic step towards normalizing relations. Sacred ensembles of the Hoysala finalized as India's nomination for consideration as UNESCO World Heritage Site. In football, Cameroon to face Egypt and Burkina Faso to clash with Senegal for a place in the Africa Cup of Nations final. And now, before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan, Vaishnava Jan, by artists from Nauru on their National Day.
Vaishnava Jana Kao, Bene Kahiye Je, Piye Pahai, Jane Lede, Aradu Te, Upkare Kare Soye, Aradu Te, Upkare
And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.